Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this Frosmo webinar. Today we're going to be talking about Workspaces, which is a brand new feature on the Frosmo platform and makes the front-end developer ever so safe and simple. Before we get down to business, I would like to introduce us. My name is Katri Metsävuo and I work as a documentation specialist here at Frosmo. And I'm lucky today to have with me here Martin Birch, who is one of our skilled product developers and actually a part of the team that developed the Workspaces feature. Today we will go through what on earth a Frosmo workspace is, what you can do with Workspaces, how it all actually works, and then we're going to do a little comparison between Workspaces and some other testing tools that we have provided by the Frosmo platform. And then Martin here will show you how the Workspaces work in action. And hopefully at the end we will have a little time for Q&A. So in case you have any questions, please type them to the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Before we talk about the Workspaces, I'm going to go very briefly through what the Frosmo control panel actually is, the Frosmo platform actually really is, so that you can understand how the Workspaces fit in the bigger picture. As you can see in this very simple image, when you use the Frosmo platform on your website, our JavaScript library runs on top of your site. And basically, in short, what you do is you create configurations such as visitor segmentation and modifications through the Frosmo control panel that is our user interface. Those configurations are then saved in the Frosmo backend. And when a visitor then visits your site and views a page, the Frosmo control panel will determine what kind of content modifications or UX improvements to show them and when and to which visitors on your site. And then content for these modifications comes from your own content management system or other storage system. And to go to the actual point, Workspaces is a brand new add-on feature to the Frosmo platform, so you have to actually enable it to be able to use it. And it's essentially a Frosmo workspace is a sandbox for developing, testing, and previewing features on your site. You can work with modifications, placements, modification templates, and triggers in a workspace. And then we can go through very briefly what you can actually do with Workspaces in more detail. As I said, you can develop features in your production environment. It's very safe because you create a copy of any feature from your production environment, so you have absolutely no risk of breaking anything on your site. You can test your features and even complicated implementations such as campaigns on your live site without again having to have a different workflow for them. And you can very easily preview your content and all the UX improvements, modifications, whatever you have done, and share the preview URL with your team members or customers or actually anyone. So it's very easy. Martin, is there something else we should say about what you can do with Workspaces?
I just think we should reiterate the point that it's very safe, that it's not touching the production environment.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the whole point, I guess. Then we will do a little explaining of how the workspaces fit into the UX development environment and cycle. Here you can see the Frosmo control panel, which is, like I said, and like most of you probably know, the UI we use to access the Frosmo platform. You have there some modifications and placements that are already in production. You can move them or add them to an existing workspace or create brand new modifications in a workspace. If you touch the existing modifications or placements or other features, they will be duplicated to the workspace. You can then edit or modify them or develop them further any way you like. And you can very easily preview them and let anybody who is interested or relevant to your project preview them. And then you can easily publish them to production so that they go live and they are visible to all your website visitors. On the other hand, at the same time, the modifications, placements, or any other features that are currently live on your site are still visible to visitors and are not affected anyway by the work that you do in a workspace. And then we will do a little comparison between workspaces and some other testing tools that we already had available in the Frosmo platform. One that I think most people who have used the Frosmo platform a lot are familiar with is test mode, which allows you to show modifications to a limited audience at a time for testing purposes. And the main differences between the test mode and workspaces is that you have to activate the test mode in your browser. So then it means that you are in that browser session, you are in test mode and all the modifications you see are in the test mode. Whereas with workspaces, you can sort of test modifications individually if they are in separate workspaces. And as I said before, you can really easily share the preview URL. Also in test mode, you can't really test a feature that is currently in production, whereas with workspaces, you can. Can you think of an example of how workspaces can be used to solve a problem that you can't solve with test mode?
So I think you brought up the point there is that in test mode, all modifications that are currently being developed and are under test mode will be shown. Whereas workspaces, you can sort of isolate that feature and only preview that particular feature that you're working on.
Yeah, so essentially it's all about making the workflow simpler.
Exactly
and smoother. Yeah. The Frosmo platform also provides the preview tool, that is a browser extension for previewing and debugging modifications on your site while you are developing them. And workspaces, again, provide more functionality in a way because, like I said, preview tool is a browser extension, whereas workspaces are built in the platform.
Correct.
So with workspaces, you can actually develop features and not just preview content that you have already developed. And as we're talking about workflows, to use the preview tool, you must be logged into the control panel to be able to use it. Whereas, like we're stated several times, with the workspaces, you can just preview the features anywhere, anytime. Can you think of some actual use cases for the preview tool and workspaces? How are they different?
So with the preview tool, it's all about previewing current production content in different places, whereas the workspaces is about developing new features or existing features without affecting production.
Yeah, so the use case, there's probably need for both of them, but the use case is somewhat different. So now we could go into the demo where Martin will show us how the workspaces actually are created, how you can add some content in one, and how you can preview that existing content, and finally how you publish that content to production.
Great. So I have here frosmo.com. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo basically the workflow from creating a workspace modification, developing it, previewing it, then publishing it. So for this particular use case, I'm basically going to change the text on the front page here to say something different. So if I head on over to production and I navigate down to workspaces and I select overview, here is where I see a list of the workspaces that I currently have being developed on. Now I have no workspaces at the moment, so what I can do is create my first workspace, and I would call it demo example. And I hit create.
That's
and now I've created, thank you. So I've created a workspace, and here I have the unique ID 217. And if I enter the workspace, I now have all the different features that I can develop. And as Katri mentioned, I can develop modifications, placements, templates, and triggers. So for this particular demo, as I said, I want to create a placement and a modification. So let me first create a placement in the workspace. So I select there. And some of you will be familiar with this UI. It's exactly the same UI as you would use if you're creating a production placement. But the difference here is I'm now editing with inside the workspace. So again, I type demo example. It's descriptive enough. And then I choose the place where I want to edit that. And I already know that it's this selector.
So where can you get the placement selector from the page?
Yeah, so for this example, I used Chrome and I used DevTools, and I simply selected that element that I wanted to change and then copied the selector. But there's other extensions I could use to do that. I then want to replace the content, and because I want to show it on other URLs, I'm not going to add any URL matcher. I hit save. I then want to go back to the workspace, and as you can now see, I have the workspace placement inside my workspace.
Indeed.
Next thing would be to create the modification. So I select create modification, and again, I'll just do demo example.
There I can actually see that UI is slightly different than when you normally create a modification.
That's very observant, actually. It's very true. The reason we did it this way is because we wanted to have the workflow flow better instead of jumping around different pages when creating a workspace modification.
So you have sort of stripped it down of some unnecessary functionality.
That is correct, yes. I will create a basic modification, and I will uncheck enable comparison group because I want to show it to all visitors, and I don't want 10% to see the original content, as this is just a demo. I select create, and it's created my modification. But as you might notice, it's actually sort of dimmed a little bit, and that's because the modification isn't active. So if I select the title here, or I select the action menu here and edit content, it will take me to the modification UI, where I can then edit my modification. And again, it's exactly the same UI that you're familiar with when editing modifications in production, but it's just simply stripped down for the purposes of workspaces. And I can tell that I'm in the workspace modification as it tells me the workspace modification, the workspace ID in the top here, 217. Now what I'll do is I will create a single variation. As I'm not doing any A/B testing, I just want to demo this particular content. So I activate the variation. I then have some pre-designed content already. The content here isn't so important. What is more important is how we develop the workspace modification.
Exactly.
I click Save All, and then I want to basically select the placement as to where I want to show my content. So from the drop-down menu here I have my workspace placement demo example, and there the ID I know is from the workspace. So I select that, I select Save. Everything looks brilliant, ready to go. So I click Activate.
So you have to remember to manually activate the modifications, for example, in this case.
Exactly, and the reason is it's the same workflows you're used to when you're activating production modifications.
Yeah.
Then if I select here the 217, or I head on over to here in the navigation, it'll take me back to my workspace overview page. Whilst that's loading. So now I have my modification and placement all tied up. Everything is looking brilliant. If I head on over to frosmo.com and I reload, you'll notice that the changes haven't appeared.
Yes.
Which you would expect if you were in production, let's say. And that's because I'm not previewing that workspace. I'm currently seeing production.
I see. And the production is not affected by what you did in
That's
the workspace.
correct. So to preview the workspace, I select the Actions menu here, and I select Preview Workspace. And this was the preview URL you were talking about earlier. And now, as I can tell, here I'm activated into that workspace 217. So now I'm currently in the workspace. If I head on over to the main site and I reload the page, the content should change. So now I have the workspace content coming from the workspace. It's not touching production, and I can tell I'm in the workspace because I have this indicator here. Now, I can either drag the indicator around, or I can double click to remove if it's blocking my view.
So it's very easy to see when you're previewing workspace content and when you are looking at the live content.
And if I want to preview the live, or if I want to see the live content again, I just hit deactivate, reload, and then I'm back at seeing production.
Eventually,
yes. So this, and then once I've sort of had the development process, the iteration, let's say, depending on how the modification is developed within the team, it's time to publish. So again, publish basically means taking the current workspace as it is now, and then publishing to production.
Yeah.
So in the drop-down menu here under Actions, I select Publish Workspace. And because I've created these modifications inside the workspace, they're going to create new modifications. Now currently, they've assigned an ID. So for example, the modification here, it's been assigned a unique ID. Now when we publish to production, there's going to be a new ID. And the reason we've done that is that any KPIs that are associated with that workspace modification won't be attributed to the production workspace once published.
So that means that the statistics will start building up from scratch when the modification is published.
And this is what differentiates this from test mode, because when you're working on test mode, you're working on the modification that eventually will be removed from test mode and be active. So you will have the statistics already attributed to it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. You don't want to mess with your statistics.
That's it. So I select publish, and then it publishes it to production. And then from there, I go to the production modification list, and I have to activate the modification. And the reason being is we want you to have full control on when this should be seen by your target audience.
So what happens to the workspace after you've published it?
So what happens is we still leave the workspace there because you may want to, for example, create new features, or if you want to, you can remove it. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah. And it's probably a good idea not to have too many empty workspaces lying around. Or
exactly. In my experience, it's better to keep the number of workspaces that you have to a minimum, as then it's clear on what is currently being developed and what isn't being developed for your site.
Yeah, makes sense. So what if you want to modify existing features such as modifications?
Yeah. So let's say now I've published that modification from the workspace to production. So I want to bring it back because I want to make a few changes, but I don't want to affect the current production modification, which again is what would happen with test mode, because when you put it into test mode, it takes it out of production circulation.
So then nobody can see it in the production side.
So over on the right side here, I select which feature I would like to add the existing to, and I select add existing modifications. And then here, I tick which modifications I want to add. So in this case, it's the demo example. I add, and now this is added. I select resolve to resolve any conflict.
Yeah, so what happens actually when you're making changes into existing content and there are other people making changes to the content of that same site? Is there a danger of creating a conflict between modifications?
Yeah, so if you have developers touching production, then it's best to, once in a while, in the right-hand side here, select Update Workspace Custom Script. Because when we create the workspace, we create a snapshot of that workspace. We create a snapshot of production at that time of creation of the workspace. So over time, of course, production will change. So just to update that snapshot of what production is currently, you would select Update the Workspace Custom Script.
Okay, so it's that easy basically. Well, 2 clicks, not just one, but
2 clicks,
pretty
yes,
easy anyway.
yes.
Okay, thank you for the demo. It's been very informative. And that's more or less what we had to say and show you today. We still have time pretty nicely actually for a little Q&A in case you have anything to ask. I know actually that I have a few questions to Martin. What if I want to work with something else than placements or modifications or templates or triggers? Is there a workaround, and why were these features the ones that were selected?
Yeah, so within the team, we chose these 4 because these are the most common features that are used within the Frosmo platform when developing functionality for your site, let's say a navigation menu.
Okay.
If there are features that we have overlooked, then by all means, please make a request to sales, and then we can look at implementing those within the workspace.
Yeah, so if you find that other features could be useful to be developed in workspaces, you can always contact Frosmo Sales or your sales manager to ask more about that. One thing I was wondering, can I actually have as many workspaces as I like?
Yes, you can. You can have unlimited amount of workspaces, but as I said previously, from my experience, it's better to keep that number as minimal as possible, as then from a managerial standpoint, it's easier to know which features are currently being worked on and which features aren't.
Yeah, you want to keep your control panel nice and tidy.
Yes, exactly.
If you can. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions from the audience, at least yet. I'm still going to be here for a few minutes, so if you have anything to ask, go ahead. But I think that one question that you're all wondering about at the moment is, how do I get workspaces? Well, as I said, it's not included in every plan for the Frosmo platform. It's an add-on. So to get the workspaces, you should contact sales.frosmo.com, or if you're already our own friend, you can contact the sales manager or the CSM you're working with. But in the meanwhile, for more information about workspaces, we have some excellent documentation that you can familiarize yourself with. And I actually see we have a question here. Minna here is asking whether you can use the GDPR opt-in or opt-out settings with the workspace modifications.
Yes, you can, but because you're developing the feature, you can use the GDPR settings.
So they are there in the UI, just
they're
like
in the
with
UI,
any modification. So you can select them. You can select the opt-out or all as well. But does it make sense to do so in the development?
Yeah,
because
that's a good question.
You can sort of, if you're developing a new modification, I guess you can just decide not to use those options that
Yeah.
are like that have something to do with profiling. Or then you can just create the modification and decide later who
Yeah,
to show
that's
it
it.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. And in case we don't have any other questions from the audience, I guess we are done for today.
There's another question, I
sorry,
believe.
there is another one. If you publish directly from the workspace, what about the GDPR or selective profiling settings then?
It's still retained.
Yeah.
So if you select whatever GDPR setting you select for the modification, it's still retained.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're just publishing that that workspace modification directly into production, and we're deactivating it. So then it's up to you to activate. And the only thing that really changes is that ID. As I said, the modification ID is different.
Yeah. So hopefully that now answered your question.
But good questions actually about the GDPR.
Yeah, that is a good question. In case you have any other questions, please contact your generic sales email at Frosmo or your own contact person. And thank you so much for participating, and I hope to see you in our next webinar. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.